when there's a war on, tonight if you go and look at your television, you probably see some of the horrors of Afghanistan and other wars that have taken place. Now, during the war, there wasn't television. We had radio reports. And if you went to the cinema, you'd see Pathé News, which gave sanitized pictures of cheerful soldiers with mugs of tea by a tank. They would give some details. But you didn't see the horrors that you can see on television now. So people, obviously, with dear ones away at the war, were worried and concerned. They didn't have this visual picture of what their loved ones were going through.
I tried to be a Christian. I had to sort it out, because how can you be a Christian but be a soldier? It's not good being a dead Christian. You've got to be a live Christian. And what about the other fellow? What's he going to be? It's a question of life and death. And it's all right to have wonderful thoughts about it, but when the chips are down, it's a different matter. Someone's threatening your very life. There's no way of getting out of it.
No, morale was very high. You see, in that war, the object was quite clear, wasn't it? Destroy Hitler. Not so nowadays. What's the object in Afghanistan? Nobody knows quite, do they? But there was a very definite thing to do, was push the Germans back and get rid of Hitler. And they were determined to do it.
Got a bit depressing sometimes. But I was pretty lucky. I weathered my war pretty well, I think. Well, being in the RMC, I'd always wanted to be a doctor, but I wasn't clever enough.
But the desert's a good place to fight a war in. No mud, not many insects, and the short water's the problem. You had one water bottle a day. But the sappers usually made a bit of extra. We didn't go short now.
I think the ones of my age thought it was fantastic, because we'd never had a general before who told you all to gather around and listen to me. Never. They always kept a distance, but he didn't. He was very, very clever. Yeah.
Oh, he's no doubt about his speeches at all, and he used to put them over very well. The only drawback was that he had a slight impediment in his speech. His S's kept running through his speech. I think he was slightly tongue-tied. But he put speeches over on the radio extremely well. And in our home, with my father having been in the Navy and having seen churches around, you weren't allowed to do anything else whilst he was broadcasting.
I remember coming in one day back from the dockyard to the MT room, and I walked in and I was saying something, and shh! It was Churchill. on the radio. And of course his voice, it was unmistakable. He certainly inspired everybody.
Yes.
And even if you'd felt dead beat, and sometimes you worked day, night, day, if you'd felt dead beat and that voice came on the radio, you were rejuvenated.
Yes.
It wasn't all fun, but like looking back at your school days, I don't remember the rainy days, but I remember the sunny days. And it's the same with them all, I think. Apart from people you lost, you do remember the sunny days and the fun you had.
Yeah.
Looking back now, I suppose we really couldn't take it on board, I don't suppose, really. You know, we were young and thought perhaps nothing was going to happen to us, and nothing did happen, but of course they went further over, you know, they didn't put bombs down immediately in the vicinity of Mere or places like that at home, but they went to Bristol, and that's where they were going.
I remember the Sunday when the war was declared and how upset my parents were. I had a brother, he was 3 years younger, and a very young sister. And we didn't really know, we knew it was terribly serious because of the way the parents and older people were acting. But we didn't really realise what lay ahead of us.
People on the whole were very friendly towards each other. As I said, I finished the war in the WAF, and that was a different community altogether from, you know, the civilian side. Though when you were in uniform, people were very kind to you. I remember once having being moved from one RA station to another. I was going to cross over the bridge at Crewe Station with a heavy kit bag, and an old porter came up who must have been well in his 80s, and he took the kit bag from me and said, "A girl like you." Well, I was much bigger and stronger than he was, but bless his old heart, he insisted upon taking my kit bag and finding me a corner seat in the chair, simply because I was in uniform. On another occasion, I'd been to a cinema with a friend of mine, and there was an old lady outside, and she said, "Come and have a cup of tea," which was something. And we went to her house, and she gave us tea. She'd saved some milk, which actually I can't bear milky tea, creamy tea. She'd saved cream, and she tipped this cream into the tea, and about 2 spoonsful of sugar. You know, she said, "Oh, you girls deserve it." And bless her heart, I loved her dearly for it, but I've never had such an awful cup of tea. But that was the sort of thing that you got. And with people outside, they recognised, you know, that you were doing your bit. Not that I think my bit scared Hitler very much, but at least I was in uniform.
My father had been in the Royal Navy for over 20 years. And one day in the autumn, late autumn, I came out of school and to my astonishment found him in the car, small car, against the curb, which was most unusual because what about his job? Because he'd retired from the Navy. When I climbed into the car, he told me he had his calling up papers. So he was called into the Navy and became an instructor down at a place that you might have heard of, Gosport, in Hampshire, near Portsmouth. And they discovered while he was there he had an illness, so he was invalided back to do his job as he normally did. And that was a postman, by the way, which we wondered about because he'd been ill, but apparently walking about in the fresh air did him more good than harm. My mother and I were quite nervous about it because, you see, several of the people that we knew were called up, and a number of them we never had any more of. One went out down in the Mediterranean, and I forget what happened to one or two of the others, but we hoped it wouldn't happen to him, but of course the illness in a sense saved him.
Oh, morale was high, always. I think more than anything we felt angry that Germany was daring to behave the way she did. You know, it wasn't cricket. They weren't playing the game properly. And the British at that time, and I think still underneath, we still feel like that as a nation. Even if you have a disagreement with another country, there are ways of doing it, and Germany didn't play the game.
Well, when they were going over to, you know, to France, we'd already had that great victory in El Alamein, and the spirits of everyone in this country lifted just like that. And everyone was in it, you know, together. It was great. It was great. Everyone was together with that, you know, and everyone put their all into it.
But I have to say, in the early 1940s, we came very near not winning the war. And it was quite a sickening feeling. You know, you just felt you'd got to dig your heels in, you've got to stick it out. And we were very short of food, very short of accommodation, transport, all in war work. There wasn't very much to enjoy during those years. But you just felt, you knew you'd got to keep going. We are a cussed nation, aren't we, really? But I think the war brought out the best qualities in the British, certainly. I mean, you had your black sheep, you had your black marketeers, and you had people breaking in when your house had been bombed, breaking in and stealing things, but that's human nature. You'll get that wherever you are, whatever the circumstances.
There was such a feeling of comradeship, and people came from the next street with trays of tea, and everybody was so helpful. There was a wonderful spirit.
Boy, to make a few bob, my dad used to arrange dances on Friday night in the village school. Yeah, it was all, you know, it was all above board, like, it was all done through the church. Of course, it was a Church of England school, and the vicar gave it his blessing, you know, that you could use the church as the only hall that was in the village of any size, you know, the school. They used to have these dances, and we used to go around and advertise it pretty well, and the girls used to come from all over to come out to the dances with the American soldiers. And they used to have a band. And it was quite a laugh, really, but there we go.
They had a very big, I was just thinking the word for it really, it was a big sort of conference hall in Glasgow, and they used to hold dances there, and also in one of the hotels they had a dance hall there, and that was quite enjoyable, you know, to go. So, but yes, the Glaswegian people were so hospitable, you know, they really did their best to make the service people feel at home. And every Saturday they had a sort of get-together in one of the big conference rooms, and they put on a concert for the services generally. And that was always very nice, and then we had a sing-song and goodness knows what. So, yes, it was very, very enjoyable, really. I mean,
I've never known anything like it. There was a better community feeling with the people in those days than there is now, because you're all in the same boat. And you knew that, you know, it's just, you just got to keep going on. Spirits never left people. They just was quite happy in their own way. My auntie, she ran quite a few dances in the village. Oh, yes. We had the soldiers who were in Englefield Green. They came down to Englefield Green. We had dances, yeah. We made the most of it.
A huge drill hall might be taken over and used as a garrison theatre, and all sorts of forces would gather there. It was 4 forces. And occasionally we did performances at these garrison theatres. And also I used to play at what they called workers' playtime in the munitions factory, or whatever sort of factory, we never found out what. The night shift would be entertained. We'd arrive about 2 o'clock in the morning, do a performance. I'd have dinner in the canteen with them at 4 o'clock in the morning, go home, have an hour's sleep, and then go to work.
But one of the things I remember, not long after war being declared, and I was in church, and our vicar had said in his lesson that he wanted people still to go to church. I mean, at the time, as I said, it was a fairly middle-class place. Nobody would dream, no woman would dream of going to church without hat, gloves and stockings. And he said he realised the difficulty with people working, and he said, don't stop coming to church. Come in your work clothes, it doesn't matter what you're wearing, just come. And the following Sunday, his wife, who was a most prim, stern-looking woman, quite charming, but she looked very stern, came to church with no hat, no gloves, and no stockings. And even though I was a schoolgirl, I thought that must have cost her an awful lot. But she was setting an example, and the church was attended by as large congregation as possible. But it was noticeable that people did start coming in sort of casual clothes, and but it was Mrs. Cole's example, I think, more than anything else, that made people feel that this was all right, that they could go to church in any other thing.
I don't think that, people realise what a stressful time it was for ordinary people, and to carry on their lives and their businesses, and to cope generally. People were growing their own vegetables, and they had chickens and ducks, and people were going around shooting rabbits and all these sort of things, to supplement their food shortages. So it was a stressful time.
The loss in accommodation, in housing through the bombing was almost unbelievable. And business buildings as well, hospitals were bombed and everything. I think we were heartened a lot by the continued presence of the royal family. I'm not a flag-waving monarchist at all, but there was a nice feeling that we're all in it together. Maybe that sounds a bit silly to you now, but it did make a difference to a lot of people who were far from being monarchists. But there was that shared feeling. I think people were kinder to each other, especially if you knew you might not wake up alive in the morning.
Oh, when I was going home, I used to see these people coming down with all their evening, their pyjamas and night dresses and all their toiletries, and they had these sort of bunks, if I can remember. And they came down with the children as well, you see. Funny atmosphere, but a great sort of togetherness. You know, you sit in a train and you just talk to people, but you wouldn't do it now, but you just chatted to people because we were all in the same boat.
Well, I think that the community was really quite brave and thought, well, we can't win a war if we're frightened, and so, yes, we just took it as it went. There were people I knew that were obviously in the armed forces, but once again, people just didn't talk about where they were because careless talk costs lives.
Coming more up to date, not for you youngsters, but at the time of the Falklands War, I was a naval social worker. And when there had been some action, the facts were sent to us, and on the television screen there would be telephone numbers for next of kin to ring up to see whether their loved ones were safe or not. And I got a lot of... I was up in Scotland at the Faslane, the submarine base, and I got so many people phoning up who were not actually next of kin. It was perhaps a mother who said a daughter-in-law wouldn't sort of let her know. And I thought at the time, this anxiety that was being fed to the next of kin, to the families, and only certain information could be given to certain people. And I wondered whether that is any better today than way back in the World War II, when people weren't all the time having the actions of war being brought into their sitting room as they are today. I don't know, that could be a debatable point which was better, but certainly I think there was quite a lot to be said for, and I think a lot of this kept the morale of the people in the Second World War. I think the morale, which we heard a lot about, was high. I think it was perhaps because people weren't quite as aware of what was going on that they might be today. I don't know, it's something that could be debated, but there's a saying, ignorance is bliss, and sometimes I think that could be true.